first question of this afternoon, of course, goes to the director of the Nobel Institute, Geir.
Thank you very much, Professor Ferguson. Brilliant lecture. It's good to have you here. We've been trying for many years. We're finally here. And of course, you have ventured into the prediction business, the most difficult of all businesses. And almost everybody who ventures into the prediction business will sooner or later be wrong. I thought you gave a very, very interesting analysis of the decline of the West. And of course, this is absolutely right. The West has declined. And China and certain other states have risen. And identify this with certain factors. But then, to my big surprise, towards the end, in a very un-Ferguson way, you hedged your bets. Because you kind of took most of it back and said, yes, there are these other factors, which I've not really been dealing with. I mean, creativity, shale, oil, demography, and whatnot. And you didn't even mention maybe, the creativity of America and the lead of the big American institutions, your excellent universities. So why did you hedge your bets in this way? I think you could make this case that yes, Asia has risen, China has risen, and this is the overwhelming factor of our time. But the challenges that Asia, and particularly China, will be facing, as you read the suggestion, are even bigger, actually much bigger, than the four factors you enumerate.
The prediction game, as you say, is a dangerous one for historians who should concern themselves exclusively with the past. However, the past is our only available meaningful guide to the future. And most of my career I've spent, occasionally at least, using historical analogies to think about the future. The first thing you understand when you do that is that there's no such thing as the future, singular. There are multiple futures, and it's our hard task collectively to choose one of them. So when I make any statement about the future, I'm usually implicitly offering at least two, and usually more than two scenarios, and then trying to attach probabilities to them. In practice, you only need to be right, say, 51% of the time to make money. In the prediction game outside of finance, it's very interesting how little it matters whether you're right or wrong. Public intellectuals have made brilliant careers on a series of totally erroneous predictions. And conversely, being right has never really done me any good at all. It's curious how few people remember how right I was in my book on American Empire, Colossus, because it's far more amusing to pretend that I was some jingoistic neoconservative. Having said all that, let me remind you of a great remark of Winston Churchill's on the subject of the United States. Churchill, who was of course half American, himself said, "The United States will always do the right thing when all the alternatives have been exhausted." And I think there's tremendous amount of truth in that, because what I see in the United States, where I've now lived for about 10 years, is a constant process of exhausting the alternatives. Finally, having exhausted all the alternatives, I think the United States will do the right thing. It may even slowly be beginning to do the right thing in at least some areas, energy being one. So it would be a reckless pundit who predicted the inexorable decline of the United States. And I myself see a turning point, an inflection point in the relatively near future as the US takes advantage of its advantages in resources in terms of demography to do the institutional reforms I'm talking about. And this book is supposed to contribute to that process by focusing people's minds on what is actually wrong. Much of the discussion at the last election in the US was completely off the point. Republicans didn't talk, as they should have talked, about the breakdown of social mobility. They became entirely trapped in an argument about entitlements that they could only lose. Having said all that, my confidence about the United States does not extend to Europe, where I see dark times ahead. And it's very hard indeed for the West to survive if only one half of it prospers. If the United States can address the problems I've described, the big question is, can Europe? And the odds in Europe's case are much worse. The demographics are terrible. The energy option may be there, but it won't be exercised, so the dependence on imported oil and gas shows no sign of diminishing. And at the heart of Europe is an abominable institutional mess. In the prediction game, as I've said, the rewards for being right are too few. But I'm not too modest to omit the fact that I was completely right about monetary union. In the late 1990s, I and a few others pointed out that having a monetary union without any fiscal union would fail. Larry Kotlikoff and I wrote a piece for Foreign Affairs in which we said, this will work for 10 years and then fall apart. We got the timing exactly right. Probably a bit of luck was involved. But broadly speaking, our analysis was correct, that the lack of fiscal coordination would be fatal. And here we are. I doubt very much that there is a quick fix for the mess that has been made by the European Union. And indeed, when I look at the scenarios for the monetary union, there is still a pretty significant probability that the whole thing falls apart. Let's put it at 10 to 15%. They are far from being out of the woods. You are in the happy position of not being a part of this mess, but it's right next door, and it can't be irrelevant to your future prospects. You are in the unhappy position of having no say at all in the way this thing is fixed or not fixed. So my sense is that the glass is half full or half empty according to temperament. The United States will almost certainly turn itself around. It may take a few more years to find the political leadership to do that, but eventually it will show up. For Europe, I'm much more pessimistic. And after all, that's where we are today.